Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Catch up with that Brexit conference, I think, this hour, if we can. I'm also keen to find out how Theo Ushwood has got on with the mayor on that first Crossrail train. I want next, though, to turn your attention to a slightly different story. It's probably time for... It's not light relief, is it? But I don't want to talk about Apple. It's too complicated. We might talk about it tomorrow. I need to understand it a little bit better. Talk about this research into the number of people who haven't seen a Bobby on the beat for a year. I'm trying to think. I mean, first of all, you don't remember, do you? I work in central London, so I see police officers, uniformed police officers walking past every day. But if I were to sort of try to focus just on the streets around my home, I don't think I have seen one on foot, no. Because they're in a car. And guess what? So's everybody else. So I used to sort of subscribe to the school of thought that says more bobbies on the beat is good, and I've just realised that when I subscribed to that thought, I was living in an area where there was often a bit of antisocial behaviour on the streets. Nothing too dire or vicious, nothing like what we've been discussing in Harlow, but just stuff that keeps you awake. I mean, that, to be honest with you, especially when you're a young parent or a parent of a young child, that's what bothers you more, whether it's someone revving up their car or riding their moped up and down the street outside, or whether it's just 5 or 6 lads getting together to smoke some weed in the pavement 3 doors down from where you are because their mum won't let them smoke it in their house. It just keeps you awake, and it's the most annoying thing in the world. So I think, and we're going to explore this from various different perspectives, I think my position on bobbies on the beat is a little bit out of date, unless you're living in an area where there is routine public antisocial behaviour, in which case you will have seen a bobby on the beat quite recently. For the rest of us, Isn't it just a little bit anachronistic? Because you don't walk anywhere anymore. Why should the police? I don't know. Let's find out. Can we get the phone lines up and running? 03, my apologies if we were waiting to talk about the conversation we had in the last, or over the last 2 hours. I am absolutely certain, and I'm as sad as I am certain to tell you that we will be returning to a similar territory in the future. If we could think of ways, though Thomas didn't sound like a man to me who accepts charity or wants our pity, but when he told us about his little girl being essentially rendered friendless and not getting invitations to parties by dint of having Polish parents, I know it touched an awful lot of hearts. I can't think of anything we can do to help, but my God, it warms the cockles to see how many of you are offering to. I'm 10 miles away, James. The little girl's more than welcome at my son's birthday party next month. Can you tell me exactly where in Kent, where in Medway he is? We'd love to go. That kind of thing. It is out there. Thomas knows that already, but it's nice to be reminded. I want to turn, so anyone waiting to talk about that, we'll return to it soon, I promise. I want to get the phone lines open and dedicated to this subject now. The number you need is 0345 6060973. It's been published for the first time today, this research. It was carried out last summer by Ipsos Mori on behalf of Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary, and it has found that a massive number of us, a huge proportion of 36% of us, apparently haven't seen a police officer on patrol for over a period of 12 months. 23% they'd seen police on foot only once or twice over a year, and it is Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary, Mike Cunningham, who's suggesting today that the public perception of police was vitally important. We will continue to work with forces to improve the way in which they engage with members of the public to ensure that people are confident in reporting crime. Now, crime is at a historical low in some ways. Certain types of crime are. Other types of crime are on the rise. If there were bobbies on the beat in the areas we've been hearing about witnessing race hate crimes, then I guess they would be reduced. But whether or not that is a panacea, a sticking plaster to deal with a pretty deep wound, I do not know. I genuinely don't know. I don't think we need more bobbies on the beat, for the very simple reason that most of the crimes we witness, most of the crimes we fall victim to, are not crimes of, I don't know, pedestrian-based perpetrators. Not quite sure what the phrase I'm looking for is. Is this, to you, a little bit out of date, this desire to see more bobbies on the beat? Or is there something more subtle than crime figures at play here? Because the other thing that popped up this week, was it yesterday or was it last week, when we were discussing what police officers wear? Was it yesterday? And a couple of people picked up on this sort of quasi-militaristic point. Nick gets very aerated about this, and as I get older, I understand why. When you see police officers in black with their equipment belt, looks like something Batman would be proud of, and it's very, very different from when my grandfather was a police officer, and I mean, I didn't know him at the time. He was retired from the force long before I came along, but when I see the old photographs of him, he really does look like Dixon of Dock Green. You know, in the full-on the tunic and the domed hat, the old-fashioned police constable. I was born in 1972, and I wouldn't think twice throughout my childhood of walking up to a police officer in the street and asking for help. I now, and I don't know whether this is because I got into a modicum of bother as a teenager, or whether it's because of these uniform changes we describe, or whether it's just because I'm a prune. I don't feel that way anymore. I don't feel that way anymore. Usually when I encounter police in the flesh, they're either policing an event whereby, I presume by definition, they need to be stern. You know, I'm either at a football game and they're marching us down Wembley Way and they're on their horses and they're frightening. Or I'm walking up Shepherd's Bush of a Saturday when QPR are playing at home and the police are on the lookout for trouble. They're not on the lookout for sort of middle-class cretins who want to wave and say hello. They're on the lookout for trouble. So whenever I encounter the police, in terms of unplanned encounters, they usually leave me feeling a little bit intimidated, is the best word to use. Not frightened as such, but intimidated. Now, is that part of a problem with policing in this country? So that if our kids were growing up with a police presence that we were familiar with, would there be a greater sense of respect, mutual respect and affection between the police and the public than I fear is present now? Okay? The number you need is 0345 6060 973. I love it when this happens. I thought we were going to go down a completely different route, and then the red light came on and the old gob opened, and I'm really interested in this angle on this story, actually. Not the original one, but the idea that, yeah, all right, it would be a little bit silly to have more bobbies on the beat, given that most of us now drive cars. When I was a kid, Mum didn't have a car. Your mum didn't have a car. Your dad might not have had a car. That's why you knew your neighbours. It's got nothing to do with people becoming antisocial. It's got everything to do with the fact that when you were walking back from the shops, you'd quite often find yourself walking full stride with your neighbour, or you got on a bus and you saw her at the back. Now you're in your own car most of the time. Most of us are in our own cars. That's the longest walk you take is from the car to the front door. How many people are you going to meet? You can live on the same street as someone for 20 years and never actually see them in a social setting. It's not a reflection of a change in our attitudes, it's a reflection of a change in our behaviours. And the police, I think, their absence from the streets reflects that. But are you... What are you hearing? Are you hearing a bloke in his mid-40s who's just beginning to turn into one of those people who thinks things were better when he was young? Or are you hearing an accurate description of a change that you recognise? You can't deny the uniform changes, the equipment changes, the appearance changes. Maybe it's because my granddad was a copper that I had such warm feelings towards them as a kid. I haven't asked my children what their feelings are towards the police. I don't think they encounter the police. And that's kind of the point of this research. Should they? What would more bobbies on the beat do? 0345 60 60 973 is the number that you need. I want you to ring in on this. You will get through. Be quick. 0345 60 60 973. I don't know. I was about to go on an intellectual exercise in modernity and explain why we don't need more bobbies on the beat, but I can't help thinking that if there were more, they might not solve more crimes, but they might just engender a different mood. What do you think? And when is the last time you saw one? Don't just ring in to tell me last Tuesday, James, and then hang up. I mean, I want to know when it was actually useful. It was actually, and it will be a PCSO more likely than a PC. Danny's in Battersea. Danny, what would you like to say?
Hi, yeah, just tuned into the show. It's true, you never see police around, and it's something that I've consciously thought about, because, you know, I drive to and from work, so
yeah.
I'm outside the office, shall we say, and sometimes go to meetings in the car, and it's something I pick up on. Near to where I work, say Canary Wharf, you see policemen. Near to Buckingham Palace, you see policemen. But everywhere else, you never see them. And
does it matter?
You know,
does it matter?
Yeah, it really matters, because I think it's the deterrent to people even doing petty crime if they're going to see police. And, you know, I mean, in Clapham, where I live, you know, about a year ago, in literally 2 months, there were 4 or 5 muggings in the same group of streets. and it didn't stop the people still carrying the crime if there were more police. But the police are never out, and I think it's a worry. I mean, what I'd like to know is, I'm a bit older than you, so I was born in the mid-60s, and young people would respect the police.
No, well, listen to us, Danny. Listen to us. We might as well be sitting in that balcony on the Muppet Show.
No, you're just using an excuse to think that because we might look through rose-tinted glasses and people are a bit older, they were wrong. But it's actually right. I mean, how many police do we have per 1,000 of capita? Does anyone know? Because the population grows every year, and there are less police every
and yet we're told the crime figures are going down.
Well, it's a load of nonsense. I don't believe it.
We can only believe the numbers that we're given. I guess there is an argument to say a lot of people don't bother reporting anymore the sort of crimes they would have reported once. And if you haven't got insurance, you don't need a crime number, then why would you? But I believe it. I mean, there's no reason not to believe it. Why would... Muggings is one thing, but that would involve... That would involve the police being constantly present, or just responding to I mean, if there's an upsurge in mugging, they patrol the streets for a couple of weeks and then go off doing something else. Or do you want them there all the time?
No, it'd be just nice to see a visible police presence. I mean, I drive through certain areas, let's say coming home, and I drive down one road, and there are people there smoking drugs every evening, and it's down the road from the police station at Brixton. And, you just go down Cole Harbour Lane and you see people stoned every evening. I never see any police down there doing anything about it.
Well, most chief constables will tell you that they turn a blind eye to simple possession and use these days, and that they're...
Well, I think it's really sad.
Do you?
Yeah.
So you want to see more police on the street so that you see less weed?
Well, anything that's wrong. I mean,
I guess the point I'm making, I don't feel...
Do you drive?
I do, yes.
Drive?
Yes, I do.
Do you drive nearly every day, would you say?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I catch public transport every day.
Okay, there we are. So I've driven quite a bit, but not every single day of my life for 30 years. And the aggressiveness of young male adults these days on the road...
Yeah, but they used to say that about you.
Sorry?
They used to say that about you.
No.
They did. Old boys used to say that they used to talk about you as a young aggressive male when you were younger.
No. You know what? Going down the wrong side of the lane, cutting in at the stoplight...
Old people do that too. That's not just young people.
No, they don't.
Oh, Danny, slow down.
No, they don't.
No, they do. What are they called? Statler and Waldorf. That's who we're turning into. Statler and Waldorf.
Drive a bit more through South London every day, going to and from work, and you'll see what I'm talking about.
Oh, I'm sure the preponderance of absurd driving is done by young people, but it won't be exclusive. That's all I'm saying. And I'm pretty sure that 30 years ago, when you started driving, old people thought that young people were responsible for all the problems on the road, and they were probably right as well. I'm not having a pop. I'm on your team. I just, how do we know? Because you're in your 50s now, and I'm in my mid-40s. How do we know that we're not just going down the road of saying things were better in my day? How can we be sure, Danny?
Oh no, life definitely wasn't perfect. In the old days, there were various problems.
Oh, in most ways it was worse. I'm just saying on this, in the context of the police, always older people are always saying, "Oh, the police have changed. They're not like they used to be." How do we know that we're not just part of that long and tragic tradition?
I'm not complaining. Well, I'm not complaining about the job that police do, because people can criticise the police, but how many people would go out and do what they do? Most people wouldn't. So I'm definitely not criticising them. It would just be nice to see more of them, and I don't see more of them compared to, shall we say, the late 70s and 80s, thinking about being a teenager and
young people feel less safe on the streets, so therefore it would presumably follow they'd feel more safe if there were more police. Brett points out if there were more bobbies on the beat, they could have prevented those lads from, and referring back to the crime we discussed in the first couple of hours, police walking are a visible deterrent for crime. They kind of are, but... Do you buy what I say about intimidation? I'm going to ask your age if you contribute to this part of the programme. You can lie to me if you want, but am I sounding odd? As a middle-class person who's had no problems with the police since 1990, and then they were richly deserved, entirely of my own making those problems. But do I sound silly when I say they don't seem like a comforting presence as they did when I was growing up? They seem slightly more intimidating now. Do you recognise that, or am I just barking up entirely the wrong tree? Wouldn't be the first time. 0345 60 60 973. There's a word for it. I've not heard it before. Thank you to Duran for pointing this out. A bimdo. I'm turning into a bimdo. Do you know what a bimdo is? Anyone else? But you just make this up, dear, and I hope you didn't. I've just broadcast it to the nation. A bimdo, back in my day. I don't know, what's the O for? Bimdo, I suppose, because bimmed sounds a bit strange. I could be a bimd, but I'm a bimdo, back in my day. And I'm conscious of this. Everybody is as they get older. The notion that the Bobby on the Beat story in the news today is just an invitation to be a bit of a bimdo, because I am persuaded that back in my day I felt more warmly towards the police, and I don't really understand why, except for two things: appearance and presence. So as we were warming up for this hour, my intention was to say it's silly wanting more Bobbies on the beat, because most of us aren't on the beat anymore. Bobbies were on the beat when we were, and there is a lot of logic in that position. You think about the rise of the motor car. When we were kids, you would walk a lot more than you do now, and be driven a lot less than you are now, and drive a lot less as you grow older and become an adult than you do now. But actually, there's something in this. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Am I just sounding like a bimdo back in my day, or do you think if the police looked a little more cuddly and you saw them a little more often, society might change for the better? I don't know, but then again, I don't have to have an answer to every question. Steve's in Henley. Steve, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Nice to speak to you. Love your show.
You're very kind. Thanks, Steve.
Hi. I would just want to say I do actually agree that having Bobbies on the beat is a pretty good idea, especially having them in good numbers, because their raison d'etre is to be a deterrence for crime.
Yes, and yet the fact that crime figures are ostensibly falling would mean that we don't need more.
Sure, I mean that's true. I mean, just to say, I mean, I'm 18. You ask people's ages. I'm 18. One of the things that happened, obviously, in 2010 with austerity was that obviously Theresa May, when she was in the Home Office, she cut police by thousands, and so now there are fewer and fewer police officers. But interestingly, though, James, I'm sure you must have seen the last few days, the numbers of counter-terrorism police are going up in London, especially those who are armed as well. And I would just like to point out as well that when you think about crimes and stuff, and you say that, yeah, there's more crimes committed with motor vehicles and that criminals use cars, I just want to make the point that obviously some of the worst crimes that have happened obviously in this country, like 7/7, was a couple of blokes walking into a tube station. I mean, they didn't obviously use a car, but having obviously police on there.
That's not what is meant. Counter-terrorism police, who will be at place why the earlier caller mentioned Canary Wharf, anywhere that might, where Canary Wharf has been a target for terrorism historically. So they're not Bobbies on the beat, though. Your Bobby on the beat is your friendly neighbourhood copper walking down the same streets every day and known to the local community. You're 18, I'm 44. I struggle to understand why we ever got rid of that, and now you're telling me you do too.
Yeah, I mean, I've my dad works as a lawyer, and he obviously talks to loads of people through his job about, you know, policing and things, and he says that one of the best things to have, and I completely agree, and obviously when I go around town, I do feel a lot safer when there are just, you know, your standard police officer on street corners, because it does deter crime. And when you were saying earlier, you said that you felt slightly intimidated by the police.
Well, here's the thing. I'm not being devil's advocate. It only deters crime on that street corner. If I want to mug you, I'm just going to follow you around the next corner and then bash you over the head.
I completely agree with that. And it's obviously impossible to have police officers around every single street corner, otherwise it's going to be like living in North Korea or Nazi Germany or something like that.
Yes.
So it's impossible to have. But I do think that certainly if you are saying like you are following someone through an area and you do see a police officer and you said that you personally feel intimidated by the police.
Yes.
In sometimes, I don't think that is in all. I mean, it might certainly be in some community areas might be a bad thing, especially when the community relationships are a bit sort of, you know, they're not particularly good between the police and the community, where the community feels intimidated by the police. But in high crime areas, feeling intimidated,
but I'm not
be a bad thing.
No, I hear you. And in high crime areas, they're more likely to be there actually, because I think this is more about a sort of social cuddliness, for want of a better word, a warm atmosphere that's engendered by the presence of uniformed police on the streets.
Yeah.
You're only 18 now, so it's not that long ago you might have found yourself getting lost on a trip to the shops. Would you feel warm and safe if you saw a police officer while you were lost in I can't say Woolworths, you won't know what I'm talking about.
No, I don't know what you're talking about. The one that Henley closed a few years ago. But I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Argos. When you're patrolling the catalogues of Argos and you realise you've lost your mum, would a police officer make you feel warm and safe?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the things obviously about this country, like this is really good, is like obviously our police aren't armed and we're only one of two countries where the police aren't armed, and that's really fantastic for relationships between just the everyday citizen.
I think it is, and yet I sustain, at risk of sounding like a bimdo, if that is indeed a proper acronym, I still think it was warmer and cuddlier back then. But I'm wondering now, I don't know, fella, I think I've thought about a lot lately, but I wonder whether my late granddad is responsible for this, because we grew up with having his pictures. I grew up knowing him and knowing he was a policeman and being very proud of that. And the fact that I just think of him in his uniform as being a typical police officer. And when I was a kid, the police officers looked like he did in his pictures. But when Steve was a kid, they looked like they look now. So why would he feel any less or more comforted or less or more intimidated than I do? Steve, what a great call. Thank you. Ryan's in Manchester. Ryan, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Obviously, just to echo, I also love your show.
No, you don't know. Can we make it clear that's not? You do not have to say that before coming on. In fact, it's quite welcome to say that you despise my every utterance, but you just can't turn away from the radio, because they're a big part of the listenership as well. Ryan, carry on.
Oh, it's okay. Well, I'm on both sides of the fence here, and I don't like to be that kind of guy who's obviously jumping from boat to boat. But I had a lot of experiences as a child, obviously as a probably as a bit of a reprobate on the receiving end of obviously the police, and I think my perception of them changed when they were quite aggressive and kind of treating you in a certain way depending on obviously how you looked and things. I don't know whether or not I was my perception of it, but I'm 32. I grew up watching The Bill,
right,
thinking that my perception of it was there was a nice kind of, you know, they were all obviously down there to do something. It was like a calling. Like I'm a qualified teacher, so I think that, you know, I had a bit of a transition, obviously going from reprobate to teacher.
Yes,
and
helpful.
I think the public perception, due to things like the police shows that are now on, and you know, The Bill's now being cancelled publicly, is a bit too cuddly.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking of Jeff Hollis. I don't know who everyone else thinks of. June Ackland or Jim Carver. I don't know who comes up first, but they were all nice coppers, nice people, weren't they, who happened to be police officers, most of them.
Yeah, they were. But but on my own personal experience, when I was a very, very young child, I think I had a relationship with them when they come into school and they do talks and things, and they were very approachable and very, very nice, and you would approach them as a child thinking, you know, like you said before, the example about, you know, getting lost and saying to them, "Oh, can you help me?"
Yes.
That was my perception when I was really young.
And is it still? Is it? Yeah, go on. Sorry, I've interrupted you.
No. It's not. Unfortunately, it's really not. I've never been charged with crime or anything at all. I've got completely clear DBS, you know. But
they just occupy a different place in your sort of personal, emotional palette from what they did when you were young.
Well, I was jumped in Chester about 7 years ago and hit with a knuckle duster.
Oh, man.
And 40 stitches in my face. I had 2 broken wrists, and I was literally walking down the road, and I had a shaved head. I've always had a shaved head. I was walking down the road, and this is while I was doing my teaching practices, so I wasn't a thug. But when I was interviewed by the police in A&E for the initial approach by the police, they were quite aggressive with me, and
because of how you looked.
Perception, yeah, because there was a perception that I must have done something to led to me being attacked. Now, when they looked at the CCTV footage and there wasn't at fault, and it was a Monday evening in Chester, and I was with one person, then they were a little bit softer with me. But the damage had been done. You know, in my opinion, there should have been respectful of the fact that I'd been jumped and I was in a bit of a bad way. But the initial approach was, you must have done something, or this is just another thug who's probably got into a fight and come off worse.
Well, then maybe that just is an inevitable upshot of getting older then, and not necessarily evidence of the police changing, but of you changing, of us changing. I recognise what you describe, and I guess police, like all of us, struggle not to judge a book by its cover, but it's the mention of CCTV that gives pause as well. Maybe that's part of the reason why things have changed so much. Ryan, I've just noticed the time. I'm cracking on only because I'm very late. It's 12:31. The evidence shows that police in cars, Perry tells me, and I have no reason to doubt Perry, he's one of my most assiduous correspondents, catch more criminals. That's not what we're necessarily talking about, though. I'm wondering whether the research into the number of so-called bobbies on the beat is actually more subtle than statistics ordinarily allow. Why do you want police officers on the street? Because I want the bond between police and the policed to feel a little warmer than it does now. What do you mean, a little warmer than it does now? Well, back in my day, I'm pretty sure it felt better. And that's when I begin to worry that I'm turning into a bimdo, a back in my dayer. So, you tell me. Bobby's on the beat, or indeed your attitude to the police, and whether or not it has shifted over the years, and whether or not you think it's you that's changed or them. 0345 6060 973. Actually, you'll get through if you hit the numbers now. First time since 10 this morning, so don't hold back. I reintroduce you in case you've forgotten him. He's just had one of the longest holidays on record, and quite rightly too, of course, because Theo Usherwood was working his fingers to the bone during the referendum run-up and the ensuing turmoil that hit the domestic political landscape. Things calming down a bit now, although nobody's any clearer on what Brexit will actually look like as and when it occurs. But Theo Usherwood is back in the house and back in business, Theo. So my petition worked. I insisted that you got not just the average factory fortnight. I wanted you to have a month off.
Yes, I had a month off, and I'm now trying to get my head back into politics from my break, but I had a nice easy one today, nice underarm throw. I was out on the Crossrail line, the £14.8 billion Elizabeth line linking Abbey Wood in southeast London to Heathrow in the west, and the section through London is due to open next year, completion due in 2018. Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, had invited me along, and we were given the first station-to-station journey from the Excel Centre at Custom House through to Canary Wharf. It will take 3 minutes once it's open, but of course it took us 20. We were on one of those engineering trains, but really now actually the focus is on Crossrail 2, and that's going to cost up to £32 billion. George Osborne had signed up to it. Sadiq told me that actually he'd had very constructive conversations with the former Chancellor, but in Sadiq Khan's own mind there's still a big question mark over whether Theresa May's government will do the same.
You know, George Osborne, as the Chancellor in 2010, deserves credit because the government in 2010 could have cancelled the Crossrail project. When you study, as I've done, cities around the world, what's clear is there needs to be continuity and you need to plan for the future. What I'm saying to the new Prime Minister and the new Chancellor is we now need real support for Crossrail 2. We need real support for extending the Bakerloo line, real support for the trams being extended, and support for crossings in the east of London. The government, I'm hoping, recognises that if London does well, the country benefits.
Now, we will get an answer from the Chancellor, Philip Hammond, when he delivers his autumn statement in late November, early December, and that will provide the funding needed to turn what they call technicality a hybrid bill to bring forward the legislation for Crossrail 2, which links Epsom in the south, looping up through Wimbledon, through Chelsea. Of course, there's been a bit of a row over whether Chelsea's going to get its own station. Celebrities in the area are very unhappy about that. And then round North London to Hackney. It's going to cost, as I say, £32 billion, and in Sadiq Khan's own mind, big question mark over whether that's going to happen. We were also discussing Apple. Downing Street has already made overtures to the tech giant. The basic line is if you can't get on with the European Union and their demands for £11 billion in back taxes to Ireland, why don't you come here to the UK? And London is, of course, a tech centre over at
Croydon.
Croydon's the new...
Croydon is the Silicon Valley of Europe.
Well, there are lots of techie people around where I live in East London.
Yeah,
Old
forget
Street.
that, mate. They're hipsters. You want the real money, you've got to get to Croydon. Croydon was in the news yesterday. There's more startups in Croydon. Tech startups. Croydon is the place to be.
Well, I asked Sadiq whether he was keen, as the government, to ask Apple to set up here in London.
Well, it's still the best place in the world if you want talent, if you want creativity, if you want innovation. And so I welcome, any companies from around the world coming to London. I welcome investment. I welcome people having confidence in London.
Including Apple.
As long as they pay their taxes, of course they're welcome here in London. You've got to abide by the rules of the game. And the rules of the game are you pay your taxes. What's important is, Apple's a major company that many of us use their products. We want them to come to London if it means to jobs being created, if it leads to talent being attracted here, if it leads to a confidence in London. And it's really important, though, people play by the rules.
Now, Ireland's rate of corporation tax stands at 12.5%. It's the lowest in the European Union. But in actual fact, as you know, Apple were actually only paying what amounted to 0.005%.
My accountant online too.
£50 in every a million. Now, the current rate of corporation tax here in the UK is 20%. Next April, it's cut to 19%, and then by 2020, it will be 18%, providing there are no changes to what the plans originally set out by George Osborne. So, as you heard from Sadiq Khan there, if Apple, if he has his way, then Apple will not be coming to London because, of course, both those rates are well out of kilter with what they've been paying.
Which is why their denial that they've received any sort of form of preferential treatment compared to what other European countries could have offered is interesting, worthy of further scrutiny to say the least. Do you know why Apple is keeping all its money in Ireland? It thinks it should pay all its taxes in America, but it's waiting for US tax reform before it does so. These are interesting times.
Interesting times. The argument from...
You're looking very well, Theo, if you don't mind me saying so. You're beginning to look a little bit... You're beginning to look a little bit... About the bags under your eyes have dissipated, and you've got a bit more spring in your step, and a bit more shine. A new shirt as well, isn't it?
No, it's an old shirt.
Don't spoil it. We're going to sort of back to school. It's nice. You got a new pencil case, compass?
I've got a new bag.
Excellent. You're looking well. It's nice to see you.
Thank you. It's good to see you too,
And Sadiq Khan is, of course, now you're back on your radar.
Yes, very much so.
Theo Usherwood, our esteemed political editor. I know a lot of you will join me in thanking him for all the hard work he did during... Seems like a long time ago now. It almost went off a cliff overnight, you know. It was like we had an undiluted diet of news. Every day there was news. From about June the 24th onwards, for a full month, a full calendar month from the end of June, I came on air every morning and just turned on the lights. And that was it. I didn't even need to do any. We just talked together for 3 hours every day. I didn't have specific subjects, didn't have formal topics, didn't have particularly well thought out questions. Just say, blimey, Boris Johnson's not running. What do you think? And then the phones would light up. Blimey, Theresa May's going to be Prime Minister. What do you think? The phones would light up. Blimey, Andrea Leadsom is looking... It was a remarkable period. Absolutely remarkable period. But whether or not it's repeated anytime soon, I don't know. But that is why, of course, Theo Usherwood was working so hard during that period. Back to the police. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. If you just want to talk to me, I apologise for not having a clearer way into this story, but it is just a sense, in a way, almost an emotional response. I used to feel warmer towards the police, and I've had no reason to change my view except getting older or they've changed. Which do you think it is? 0345 6060 973. And can we bring class into it? We haven't brought race into it yet, although a few of you have suggested that if I wasn't white, I'd have a less rosy memory of dealing with the police as a young person. You might well be right. But class is important here. I'm just thinking, actually, about the areas that would really benefit from having bobbies on the beat. Those will be the areas where crime is much higher. See, where I live now, very, very leafy suburb, very, very little trouble. Where I used to live, on an estate in Queen's Park, just top of Ladbroke Grove in West London, right next to one of the most troubled estates in town. I mean, street by Jowl, literally next door, the next street. There was a shooting 2 streets down from where I used to live. And I'm told by friends that still live there that when there is a crime committed, a street crime, a violent crime, a knife crime, a gun crime, the police never find any witnesses. This is Britain on 2 levels. This is 2 countries existing side by side. So was that shooting, or there was a shooting, you remember, by the pub at the swimming pool party. I don't know what the legal situation there is at the moment, so I hesitate to go into too much detail, but it was certainly reported in the immediate aftermath that despite the fact someone had apparently been shot in a room full of people, no one had seen anything. And that has a lot to do with the relations between the police and the community, doesn't it? Earlier caller mentioned Brixton. I imagine, because it was Paddock, wasn't it? Brian Paddock was Chief Constable of Brixton, and he took a very softly approach to cannabis, which our first caller cited as evidence the police don't work hard enough, because to be pulling people over every time they were caught with cannabis on the street would arguably cause damage to community relations. So when politicians tell us we don't need bobbies on the beat, what they're possibly telling us is that they don't need bobbies on the beat. I don't need bobbies on the beat, living where I live now. But God, where I used to live, I wanted to see more of them. Is there something in that? Because the way Britain's gone at the moment, if it's going to be poor people that suffer from the removal of bobbies on the beat, then they're going to vote to remove them. Britain now voting on an almost daily basis to punch itself in the face every morning. So if the more you need bobbies on the beat, the more susceptible you will be to the rhetoric telling you that you don't. We can't afford it. Small state, libertarians, we don't need police officers. What's that? You just got mugged? Oh, bad luck. Stephen's in Chesterfield. Stephen, what would you like to say?
Hi. Me and you around about the same age. I'm 55. I think you're 40 something.
44, you cheeky beggar. I'm 11 years younger than you. You were at secondary school when I was born. We're not round about the same age at all.
Oh, well, in mind. In
Carry
spirit.
on. All right, then. Yes.
I agree with what you're saying to my perception of police used to be the bobby on the beat, yeah. And I never had any trouble with the police. I lived in a small mining village here in North Derbyshire,
yes.
And there was very little crime, very little at all. So we hadn't. In fact, up to then, the only connection I had with the police when they used to come in when I was at school, at junior school, etc., etc. All that changed for me in '84 when I was on strike. I was a striking miner, and I saw what the police could do, and it was frightening. Absolutely, for many years. It has mellowed, obviously, because those police have retired and moved on. We're a different generation now. It's 30 years on since the strike.
Yes.
But some of the things that I witnessed, and some of the things that were, and how that I was there, and then saw them being reported. And I know that the journalism is a different issue. But I saw how the police dealt with it, and I saw what they did, and I questioned the police, and I was told. I told one policeman, "What you're doing is wrong. You've got that wrong. You're doing arresting somebody." I says, he wasn't even there, and he turned around to me and said, "If you don't shift, I'm going to lift you."
Yeah.
And I said, "But why are you taking him?" He says, "Well, we'll just take anybody." I saw people being battened who had literally just been stood doing nothing, and they were battered by the police. This is why there will never be an inquiry into Orgreave.
Ooh, I don't know about that. You mean they'd be too frightened? They used to say that about Hillsborough, same force as well, of course.
But,
South Yorkshire.
You've only got to look at that situation where that lad was running, and that he'd got trainers on. We'd got T-shirts and trainers and jeans, and I don't know how heavy he was, but he'd got all his riot gear, and he jumped on his back and battered him. That guy now suffers with epilepsy and everything. But my perception changed of the police.
I bet it did, and I think anybody's would have done it if you thought you were fighting a righteous battle, and the police thought they were.
So you've got to remember that it was Thatcher. She said that we were the enemy of the state, and she turned the police into an army to fight us.
I'm not going to argue with anything you've said, but it doesn't explain why people who were not involved in the miners' strike have undergone a sort of emotional shift in their attitude to policing, unless it's either a form of osmosis, I suppose, or a spectator. I mean, knowing what happened, seeing what happened, because most people didn't know what was going on during the miners' strike. And if you needed to find evidence, it'd be them waving money at you when you were all on your uppers, wouldn't it? They were waving their overtime packets and stuff like that.
You could do an entire programme on the miners' strike, and people like me would on both sides of the curtain would come in, and we'd regale stories to you that happened.
But you would trust the police now, though. I
would.
Yeah.
And as I say, things moved on, but then again, you see, James, society has moved on, and crime is different now to what it was. Perhaps I'm looking at the world through rose-coloured glasses.
Yes, I wonder if we all are.
And I lived in an area where there wasn't, or there didn't seem to be, the drugs.
Oh.
There may have been, but it wasn't as available. Do you know what I mean?
Of course I do. Of course I do. I mean, depending on what drugs you're talking about, violent crime is less likely to be committed by people who are using cannabis, but most burglaries are committed by heroin addicts. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, the drug argument.
What I'm saying is, I'm just using drugs as how society has changed. From before, say when I was a kid, it may have been petty crime for no reason at all. Somebody wanted to pinch in something or something. Yes, there was serious crime, obviously, but and now the police now have got their hands tied so much because things like came in, which I'm not saying is a bad thing, things like Police and Criminal Evidence Act, but the way that they have to treat people, and in some ways is a good thing, but it's still tied their hands, and the job is so different. I do sympathise with them. It's not a job I'd like to do, and it's not a job I would do, but what we're talking about perceptions is that...
Yeah, we are, and there's no way anyone... mate, I'm so late for the travel news. I'm going to get a kicking off J. Louise Knight if I'm not careful. So take it as a compliment of the quality of your course. It's a form of radio roulette. I sometimes like to read out texts that I haven't read in advance, but occasionally you may have caught me get halfway through them and go, whoa, okay, matron, that's quite enough of that. But the first line of this one... I'm 23 and a police officer. I cover an area which is around 206 kilometres squared. There's a population of about 121,000 people. When I come into work, there might be 6 of us policing that entire area. 6. There is nothing I want more than to be proactive in my policing day and speak more with the community and be a deterrent rather than a reaction. But how can I when there are 6 of us? Yeah, austerity and cuts. once again, at the root of a national problem that will not be acknowledged by our politicians. Carol is in Hemel Hempstead. Carol, what would you like to say?
Well, thank you, James. It was just the fact that, I've actually been out of the police force many, many years because in my day you had to leave the police once you'd had your children.
Sorry, hang on. I think you mean back in my day, not just back in my day. You have to be a bimdo, Carol, to contribute to this. Back in my day.
Sorry, that wasn't a good start, was it?
It was brilliant.
So as soon as I had my first son, I went to see the superintendent and actually said, when can I come back to work? And he said, well, yeah, fine, you're on nights on Monday, so it wasn't really very conducive to having young children.
No.
But that's changed, which is great. I'm really pleased for other police officers, female police officers now, because they can actually still do a job they've been trained for. In fact, 3 of us left all because we'd had a child. So it was... I still thinking back, it was a way of perhaps disposal of female officers in some way. But yeah, I did a village beat, basically, which was on the outside of Hemel Hempstead. I did that for 15 years, and I was the village bobby. And
so people knew you. People knew you. Actually, I've done a grave disservice. There's a lady who I think she's a PCSO rather than a bobby. There's a lady on Chiswick High Road who I see regularly. So you're right. It's not unknown, but it was normal in your day.
Absolutely, and it's really weird because I've always lived in this particular part as well. So I literally opened my front door and I was at work, so it was really nice. And even to this day, having been out the job sort of 25, 27 years.
No, you sound far too young for that to be true.
Oh, thank you.
Outrageous.
I was actually hoping you might say that.
Well, there you go.
But, I was so lucky to be able to do that. And people now still say it's Carol the Copper. They still actually sort of refer to me as that. Yeah, it's really weird. People that still live in the area, although it's changed a lot, obviously. But what I was going to say was we all had our individual beats, and we were called neighbourhood officers then. I think we've been called community officers and so on since. But unfortunately, as soon as they were short of officers in the station, they would take one of us and put us in a police car and say, right, you do that beat because they're short there. And it was as if to say, well, actually, your job isn't that really important. We'll put you in a police car because you'll be able to cover a bigger area and you'll be able to do so much more. But our day-to-day thing was building up relationships, knowing if there's a group of kids somewhere. Most of them you knew by name. Most of them you knew where mum and dad lived. And there was always that element of... Can
I believe you? I know I can trust you, but it's a little bit rose-tinted. The idea that you knew everyone... I suppose it depends on the size of your patch, doesn't it? The size of your beat.
Yes. No, that's relevant. Absolutely, yeah.
And if you if you had a smaller, measurable, negotiable, walkable beat, then of course everything you said is true. It's just that we now live in a world where, you just heard that one there, he couldn't sign it for obvious reasons, but he covers an area, how big was it? 121,000 people, and there's sometimes 6 of them on duty.
That's huge. That's right. Hemel Hempstead is quite a big town, but it's like one of those satellite towns, where you've got a hub and then you've got these little outposts really going around the town, and that where I work was one of them. So yes, probably in mileage, etc., it was quite a relatively small beat. So I appreciate that.
No, but but that's the point, isn't it? Because it's the money that will be behind the reasons not to do it more. So they might try and persuade us they don't need to, but the bottom line will be that the areas that benefit most from having bobbies on the beat will be the areas with the highest crime, which are historically the areas with the least money, and therefore the people who won't really see the negatives of bobbies being removed from the beat are the people living in the middle class and richer areas. Carol, what was the biggest crime you solved during your 15 years?
Oh, well, actually, now look, this may or may not be of interest to you. But
I've only got 2.5 minutes. Sheila Fogarty's chomping at the bit. No, I need the abbreviated version.
I actually worked on a raid in Loughton with the Crays and some of the Frankie Fraser. Yeah, Frankie Fraser and all his mob, and we went to houses there and we did search warrants. We were involved in that. So that's my claim to fame.
Yeah, that's pretty hardcore, isn't it? I mean, I guess one has to point out that doesn't necessarily support your notion that knowing all the local children in the area because it involved a cessation of crime. There was still plenty of it around, but my goodness me, that's a tale. 12:57 is the time. She didn't need the 2.5 minutes, so I can give what's left of them to Benjamin, who's in Harrow. Benjamin, what would you like to say?
Just sort of touching James, I was an ex-special constable, and whilst doing that and doing your training, and the same for regular officers, you have to do a level of foot patrol as part of your induction period to get signed off to go on independent patrol status. Now, because you're doing that so much, it almost becomes like a reward scheme. So by the time you actually get to go out in a vehicle, you've had enough of foot patrol, you're fed up with it.
Why are you fed up with it, Benjamin? What's wrong with it?
Because you're out on, so you're on a night shift, you're walking around, depending what area you're covering, you may come across something, you may not. So you're walking around for 8 hours, roughly, in the rain. So it becomes like a reward.
So it's really, forget, don't we? It's just humans. It's just humans. All the topics we do, we could probably ruin them all. We could finish them within 5 minutes. Yeah, we're all human. We're talking about humans. Where would you rather be, Sheila Fogarty? Walking up and down in the rain with your boots pinching and your blisters bursting, or sitting in a car with the radio on?
In a car with the radio on.
Always in a car with the radio on. Why should police be any different, Benjamin? That's what you're saying to us, really, isn't it?
No, but that's what I'm trying to get across. Why? And the other thing you have to look at is, back in the day, when you were doing it, James, people go out on single patrol. Police could do single patrols. Now, due to the nature of the crime, single patrols in most boroughs isn't an option. You have to be double crewed. You have to be double out on a foot patrol. You have
because the people that you're likely to be pulling over are more likely to have a weapon, or more likely to situations are more likely to escalate. Benjamin, I've taken you right up to the wire. It's the only reason I'm knocking it on the head now, and the only reason I'm not going to talk to any of the other people kind enough to have called in. That's it for another